What if the greatest geopolitical mistake of the last 50 years wasn't a war, but a factory? What if the most powerful nation on Earth didn't lose influence through invasion, but through outsourcing? For decades, the United States helped build China into the industrial powerhouse it is today. American corporations moved factories there. American consumers funded its rise. American policymakers opened the door. And now, that door is slowly closing. Not with a bang, not with headlines, but with shipping contracts quietly rewritten, factories quietly relocated, supply chains quietly rerouted. Manufacturing is not collapsing in China, but it is leaving, and that slow exit may redefine global power for the next century. This is the story of how the West fed the rise of China, why that decision is now backfiring, and what the shift to Vietnam, Mexico, and India really means for America's future. In the 1990s and early 2000s, the logic seemed simple. China had cheap labor. America had capital and technology. Wall Street had vision. The Cold War was over. Globalization was the future. If China became richer, it would become more democratic. If trade increased, conflict would decrease. That was the theory. In 2001, China joined the World Trade Organization. That was the turning point. Factories didn't trickle into China. They flooded. American companies shut down plants in Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and opened them in Shenzhen. Entire towns in the US hollowed out. But Wall Street cheered. Consumers got cheaper goods. Corporate profits exploded. And China absorbed something far more valuable than money. It absorbed know-how, supply chain mastery, industrial scale, technological capability. The West didn't just trade with China, it trained China. For 20 years, American demand fueled Chinese growth. Every iPhone assembled, every television shipped, every piece of machinery exported. China became the world's factory, and the United States became the world's consumer. It seemed like a win-win, until it wasn't. By 2010, something had changed. China was no longer just assembling products. It was climbing the value chain, from toys to electronics, from textiles to telecom, from manufacturing to artificial intelligence, from copycat to competitor. And then came the realization in Washington. The United States had empowered its primary strategic rival. The trade deficit ballooned. Critical supply chains became dependent on Chinese production. Pharmaceutical ingredients, rare earth minerals, electronics components, solar panels, military-adjacent materials. The system that created efficiency had also created vulnerability. And then came 2018. Tariffs, trade war, strategic decoupling began. But the real shock came later. COVID. When Chinese lockdowns shut down entire industrial regions, American companies discovered something terrifying. They had no backup plan. Ports froze. Factories stalled. Shipping costs exploded. One country, one policy decision could paralyze global production. That was the moment corporate America started whispering a new phrase: China plus one. Not exit China completely, but reduce risk, diversify, hedge. And that's when the quiet migration began. Let's start with Vietnam. Vietnam was once devastated by war, including war with the United States. Today, it's one of the biggest beneficiaries of America's pivot away from China. Why? Low labor costs, young workforce, political stability, geographic proximity to China's supply ecosystem. Major electronics manufacturers are shifting production there. Apple suppliers, semiconductor assembly plants, consumer electronics, Footwear. Vietnam's exports to the United States have surged. Industrial parks are expanding. Infrastructure is improving. It's not replacing China entirely, but it doesn't need to. It only needs to absorb the marginal shift. And that marginal shift is enormous. Vietnam is becoming a pressure valve for global supply chains. Then there's Mexico. Mexico may be the most strategic winner in this realignment, because this isn't just offshoring, it's nearshoring. Instead of shipping goods across the Pacific for weeks, companies can truck them across the border in hours. Under existing trade agreements, manufacturing in Mexico allows products to enter the US market with fewer tariff risks. Mexico offers lower labor costs than China, geographic proximity, reduced shipping times, lower geopolitical risk. Industrial regions in northern Mexico are booming. Factories producing electronics, auto parts, appliances, medical devices. This isn't just economic, it's strategic. For the first time in decades, manufacturing capacity is moving closer to American soil. That strengthens supply security, reduces dependency, and rebuilds regional power blocks. And then there's India. India represents something different: scale. If Vietnam is agile and Mexico is strategic, India is massive. With a population surpassing China's, India has demographic momentum. Its government is actively courting manufacturers, incentives, industrial zones, technology partnerships. Apple is assembling more devices there. Defense cooperation with the United States is increasing. India isn't just an economic alternative, it's a geopolitical counterweight. The US sees India not merely as a market, but as a pillar in balancing China's influence in Asia. The supply chain shift toward India isn't just business, it's alignment. Now let's talk about what this really is. Strategic decoupling, not total separation, but deliberate distancing. The United States is not trying to collapse China's economy. It's trying to reduce leverage. Because leverage is power. When 70% of your electronics components come from one country, that country holds influence. When your pharmaceutical ingredients are dependent on one supply chain, that supply chain becomes strategic. Decoupling is about resilience, redundancy, and restoring strategic flexibility. The American perspective has shifted from efficiency to security, from lowest cost to lowest risk, and that changes everything. But here's the irony. The very globalization strategy that empowered China is now being reversed. Western capital built Chinese industry. Western demand funded Chinese expansion. Western technology accelerated Chinese advancement. The assumption was integration would liberalize China. Instead, it strengthened a centralized state with industrial dominance. And now, Western policymakers face a dilemma. You can't undo 20 years of integration overnight. China remains deeply embedded in global supply chains. It has world-class infrastructure, unmatched manufacturing ecosystems, supplier density that's hard to replicate. Leaving China completely is unrealistic, but staying fully dependent is dangerous. So the world is threading the needle. Slow exit, gradual diversification, selective decoupling. This shift has consequences. For China, it means slower growth, rising youth unemployment, pressure on export-driven sectors, increased competition for foreign investment. For Vietnam, Mexico, and India, it means opportunity. For the United States, it means recalibration, but it also means higher costs. Manufacturing outside China is often more expensive. Supply chains become more complex. Inflationary pressures can increase. So the question becomes, Is resilience worth the price? From a purely economic standpoint, maybe not. From a national security standpoint, absolutely. Because power in the 21st century isn't just military. It's industrial, it's logistical, it's technological. The country that controls production controls leverage. There's another dimension: automation. As robotics and AI reduce labor intensity, cheap labor matters less. If labor is no longer the primary cost driver, then proximity matters more. Energy costs matter more. Political alignment matters more. That favors regionalization. North America producing for North America, Asia producing for Asia, Europe producing for Europe. Globalization isn't ending, it's fragmenting into power blocks. And this is where the deeper story lies. The shift away from China is not just about economics, it's about the future balance of power. For 20 years, China benefited from open Western markets while maintaining its own strategic controls. Now the West is adjusting. Investment screening, export controls on advanced semiconductors, restrictions on sensitive technologies, encouragement of domestic manufacturing through incentives. The United States is attempting something unprecedented: to partially unwind globalization without collapsing it, to maintain trade while reducing dependency, to compete without direct confrontation. It's a delicate balance, but here's the central question. Is this shift happening fast enough? China is not passive. It's investing heavily in automation, in advanced manufacturing, in domestic consumption, in Belt and Road infrastructure. It's pivoting too. The race is no longer about who manufactures the most cheap goods. It's about who controls critical technologies, semiconductors, energy systems, rare earth processing, advanced materials, artificial intelligence. Manufacturing is the foundation of that competition because innovation scales through production, and production determines influence. So what does this mean for America? It means the era of complacency is over. It means the United States must rebuild industrial capacity, not to replicate China, but to ensure strategic independence. It means alliances matter more than ever. Vietnam isn't just a low-cost producer. It's a partner in supply diversification. Mexico isn't just a neighbor. It's a strategic extension of North American manufacturing. India isn't just an emerging market. It's a geopolitical anchor. The future isn't about isolating China. It's about building alternatives. And here's the uncomfortable truth. The West helped create the competitor it now fears. The belief that economic integration would reshape political systems proved overly optimistic. Now the correction phase is underway. Quietly, deliberately, factory by factory, contract by contract, port by port. Manufacturing is not fleeing China overnight, but the direction has shifted, and direction determines destiny. The next decade will define whether this realignment stabilizes global power or accelerates fragmentation. If supply chains successfully rebalance, America regains leverage. If decoupling becomes disorderly, costs surge and instability grows. The stakes are enormous because industrial power underpins military strength, technological dominance, economic resilience. The slow exit from China is not a collapse. It's a strategic repositioning, and it may be the most consequential economic shift of our lifetime. The world built China. Now the world is hedging against it. The question is no longer whether manufacturing is leaving. The question is whether America can rebuild enough capacity before the balance of power permanently shifts. History may look back at this moment not as the end of globalization, but as the beginning of a new industrial era, one defined not by efficiency, but by strategy, not by cost, but by control. And the factories quietly moving today may determine who leads tomorrow. Thank you for tuning in to Money and Nations. Don't forget to subscribe.